Okay, so we're starting back up with our Harry Potter app. We've got our index action for houses, which is not only showing the houses and their number of points, but is digging into the association and listing all of the students. And so this was implemented in our controller with rendering by the view. We now have to implement this show, right? We want to have a page that can display a single house by primary key. And so if I open up the routing file, we already made a route for that. It's /houses/ID, and that's going to go to that show. And the ID is going to be automatically put into the params hash. And so inside of this show action here, I'm going to make a new instance variable because that's how I pass things to my view. And I'm going to go to the house and I'm going to say find. And find takes a number, right? It takes a primary key. So I could ask it to find like, 1, but then we'd always be showing the same house. And so what I really want to find is I want to dig into that params hash and look at position ID, knowing full well that that is the same placeholder that I used here. So if I used a different placeholder here, like frog, then I would have to say simple frog right there. And again, nothing else is needed in this action. I just need to load up that single house, and then next thing that's going to happen is it's going to do this thing. It's going to automatically load up the associated view, which in this case is in the app views, and then named after the controller, houses, and then named after the action, it's show.html.erb, and this view will get access to the @house variable. It is potential to pass it a number that doesn't actually exist for houses as a primary key in the database, and so we can see what happens there. So I'll save that, and I will head over to the view. I'm going to allow myself a little bit of repetition, so I'm not going to bring that ideas of like components or partials in yet, and I'm going to allow myself to a little bit repeat how I am displaying a house in the terms of when I'm looping over the houses, or how I'm displaying a house when I am displaying it on its own. And so I will just copy and paste some of this code out of here, and we'll get into that idea of partials and removing repetition later. The only thing I have to change here is whenever I mention house, it actually has to be @house, because in the index action, we were looping through our @houses, but now we just have a house instance variable from our controller action right there. And so if I save that, we'll just can see if I've made any mistakes or if this is going to work. /houses/ some house. Oh, can't find house. Yeah, that's too high. Okay, so here is an example of an ID that does not exist in the database. And so it throws active record, record not found, and in production mode 404. A house that does exist will be 1 to 8. So here's 6. I don't want that in there. That wasn't actually a variable that I put. It's just the word house. This house has 65 points, and these are the students in that house. Okay, so I can go home, see all the houses. I can go to /houses and see all the houses, and I can go to /houses/some identifier, and I can see a house. The problem now becomes that I would never expect my users to navigate my website by manually manipulating the URL. So I need links, right? Everything that we do on a website that isn't form related is going to be link based, right? So those are the two sort of ways we have for our users to interface with all websites. It's form submission or link clicking. And so I need to make some links to click. And so on the index, I would like there to be a way to visit each one of these houses, find out more information, and eventually, once I create a students controller, I'd like for these students to be links as well, so I could link to the students. All right, what do I got in my Git queue here? What did I do? Oh, okay, so it's been a while. So this and this and this was seed script with Baker, and then the rest of it was implemented the houses show action. So that's the other nice part about the Git integration in VS Code is I can quickly see different changes and I can bring up like the difference. So it shows me like the left and right. Now that I've committed, the left and the right are identical, but before that it was sort of showing what the actual changes. So you get to see visually the diff. Yeah. Yes, so like if you don't, like any variable that exists inside of here that isn't an instance variable, it'll get garbage collected. And at the end of like iterating over the view stuff, all of that gets collected as well. So like nothing sticks around except for in production mode, Rails starts to cache things like class definitions so that it doesn't have to like reparse those class files every time a new request comes in. So there's some caching of Ruby code in the backend, but it's similar to PHP in that like once you deliver to the user, that sort of execution context goes away and the memory that it consumed goes away as well. Okay, so how do we make some links? Well, I'm going to open up my routing file. And I'm going to do one thing here, which is here I manually created these routes, which is totally allowable. That's what this whole routing file is for. But just like a lot of things in the Ruby and Rails world, we can have this stuff generated for us. And it's sort of better to have it generated for us because we're never going to make a mistake when we implement it. So I can actually replace those two lines with a request that I want routes for a resource. So I want some resource links. So I say resources. Be careful not to type resource singular because that's a completely different thing and it's confusing. And so resources house, but only index and show. And so resources house will, I can't remember if it's house or houses. We'll see in a second. It's going to build the 7 RESTful routes that Rails defaults to, but I don't want all 7. Right now my app doesn't need to create new and update or delete these houses, so I only want it to create the index and the show. And then these can go away. I'll just comment them out because it's handy for them to be there. Just sort of say this command creates the same routes as the following two. So let's go see. I think it's actually houses that I have to put there, but let's just see what happens. Yeah, and so when I tried putting in houses, it shows me that route doesn't match, and then I can actually see what the routes are in the system, and I can see that there's like a /house, totally not what I want, and so I have to go here and just change that plural, and now it shall work. There we are. That's back to working, and like slash numeric value is back to working. So that's one thing I just wanted to clean up before we did the linking, and that's because the linking depends heavily on assuming that you're using Rails' default RESTful routes. I could tweak these even more to make them more resemble how the RESTful routes are being generated, but I don't need to. I just let Rails generate them for me, and I can lean on that convention from within my views. Oh, that's Rubocop. So there's a whole bunch of shortcuts for array creation, and it's a bunch of modifiers like percent something array, percent whatever array. In this case, percent I means make a array of symbols without having to use the colon. I don't really think that this is something that Rubocop needs to optimize for, but it is, right? So this is absolutely equivalent to this. Oh, and yeah, without the commas. Sometimes Ruby tries to be a little bit more clever than it needs to be, right? And when I first came to Ruby, I was enamored by all this stuff, like how little you had to type. But I mean, really, I can type fairly quickly. So, I mean, yeah. Yes, yeah, you definitely have. So if you go here, you just get a straight up record not found. And in the end, it's just going to be a 404. So it's actually going to generate the same thing in production mode. So it's sort of nice to have that extra only matches to ID, because if now you're hitting active record, whereas before it was the route stopping you, right? So when you had the ID checking with the regular expression, you were sort of stopping earlier on. So yeah, you lose that capability. I'm sure there is. I just don't know the way. But I'm sure there's a way of adding constraints to resources. And that's the terminology Rails uses, is it's called route constraints. So there's likely a way of adding constraints back to the resources. Okay, so here's the house name. This house has this many points. On the index page, I'm not going to display the students anymore, just to give us a reason why this fictional user of our website would want to go to the house show page. And so I'll just say for a list of students in this house, click here. And click here, I'm going to make as my link. What we're typically used to doing when we want to make a link is like making that link, right? And so we could manually make this link, and I could have it go to slash houses slash, and then I could inject, don't bother copying this because I'm about to delete it. I could inject in house.id right there, and then it works. However, Rails will generate that for us, and again, we're not going to ever sort of get it wrong in that way because it's going to be generated for us. So we usually defer to letting Rails generate things for us. And it also means if we somewhere down the line sort of changed how our routing system works, our links will automatically update because they pull in their sort of ideas about what it means to link to things from the routing system. And so I'm just going to say, still going to sort of go into the page. I've got an echo statement, but what I'm echoing in is a link to, and then that's a function call where the first argument is the link text, and the second argument is what I want to link to. So there's a long way and a short way of building the next argument. If I go to a route that doesn't exist, oh, I want to just straight up a route that doesn't exist, we can see that every route has what's called a helper. And so my show route, which I'm trying to link to, has a helper called house path. So what I can say is link to the house path, and what it needs is it needs to know which house to go to. And so it needs to know to go to the house. So I can save that. So I've got link to, first argument, click here, that's the link text, comma, house path, house. If I go back to my website, my links work still. If I view source, we can see each one of them, right? ahref houses / some number. But because I built everything on Rails conventions, like because the object that I'm passing in here is called house and it's of type house and it wants to go to the house path, that we can just say link to the house. And Rails just knows enough to sort of introspect this and see that it's a house object, and then check the routing system and see if there's a house path, and it'll just do the right thing. So if I go back over here, it doesn't change how these links are being generated, and it doesn't change if I reload my screen, the fact that they work. So that's our first use of link to. I can also go into my show view, and below my list of students, I will put in a link to back to home. And here I could go to the houses path if I wanted to go to /houses, or I could go to the root path if I wanted to go just to the root of the website. And so I'll go back to the root of the website. And so this will build a link that goes to the root of the website. This is where using link to can be really handy. In a future version of this application, the root path might not actually go to the houses index action. Maybe we build a whole separate homepage. Well, we don't have to then go and dig through all of our views to make sure we're properly linking to the right place. We just change where the root path links to, and this link to will just update, right? So we don't have to go back into our views and fix up a bunch of links. The links are generated from the routing system, so we can make those changes in the routing system and have that affect the views. So if I go back to my application and I click through to a particular house, I now have this home button, so I can navigate to and from houses and the home page. And that's sort of all we're going to do in terms of houses. I'm going to now move over to the students. Oh, the one other thing I said I would do is I would eventually order the houses by name, just to sort of show that I can change that in the controller and have that affect the view. So Ravenclaw is the first house right now, and I can go into the houses controller, and instead of .all, I can say order name. That'll order alphabetically by name by default and in ascending order by default. And then there's the, and so that's the sort of nicety again of the view being decoupled from the model by way of the controller. We can make changes at the controller level, and we can affect the data we're pulling from the model and handing off to the view, in this case, the order of the elements in our collection of houses. And I can now make some git changes. Order houses. And I'll put this whole repo up on GitHub after class, along with the videos. Okay. Before I move to the student controller. Again, I come back over here and I remind us of the flow that we're about to implement. We're sort of going to recreate that same flow that we just went through with the houses and do it for students, right? So we're going to need some kind of routing component that's going to take in URLs. We're going to lean on the RESTful resources that Rails makes available to us. We're going to need a student's controller. It's going to interact with the student model and hand data off to some student views. For students, I'm going to keep things simple and I'm only going to do the show, and that's it. And so we're going to start by creating a student's controller. And in this case, it's only going to have a show action, which is going to show one student by ID, and that'll just be like a student dot, and it's going to be the same kind of code. So even though we're not leaning on scaffolding in the creation of our application, we're still sort of implementing many things that scaffolding does. Like all of our controller actions end up looking a little bit the same, right? Instead of house.find by params IDs, it's student.find by params IDs. And there's actually a gem called inherited resource, I think is the name of it. And as long as you follow the conventions of all of these things, you don't have to even implement any of your controllers. The gem just writes all the controllers for you. And so it's a little more powerful than even scaffolding in that way, because you don't even see any of the code. It's just a one call to like this inherited resource. And that's like later on in this course, we start using something called active admin, and it builds a whole backend admin panel for us. It makes use of that gem so that it can sort of couple to all of your models, and it just automatically generates CRUD controllers for all of them. We're going to also need one more view, and that view is going to go in the app views folder, but this time, because it's being triggered by the students controller, there's going to be a student subfolder and a show.html.erb to list one student. And then to tie that all together, we're going to need a route very similar to this one right here, but it's going to be a route for students like that. And I like things to line up. So we'll start at the routing file. We'll put that route into place even though there's nothing yet to route to. I'll then generate a student's controller, and I will hint to Rails that I want a show action. It will then automatically create that controller, but it'll also generate the template for the view. And so we can start with the routing system. And so resources, students, in this case, I only want an index. And because I only want an index, I don't even have to wrap it in an array. I just say, just give me only the index, simple. And this is going to build like the equivalent route minus the ID, check students. So this part won't actually be implemented. So I can go and check to see if that route is enabled. It won't work, but it will at least trigger an error saying like a particular controller isn't found. So student/some ID. Oh, why not? Students. Oh, yeah, it's because I implemented the wrong route. Here I said only index, but I actually want only show. And so that goes in. And that's why when you see me coding, I make all these like little baby steps and like try it and a baby step and I try it and a baby step. I don't trust myself to write more than one line of code without making a mistake. That's when you know you're a good programmer or not. But what I find is like when I'm trying to debug things, if I've done too much, then where do I look? right? If I've implemented the route and I've already started coding up the controller and the view, where is my mistake? Well, sometimes the error message will let me know, sometimes it won't. So if I'm making baby steps and just checking things along the way, it takes like 2 seconds to like alt tab over and try it out. So I'm a big fan of like incremental changing your code and then incrementally testing it out. And now it's working. It's just telling me that there's no student controller. And so sometimes with Rails, you can sort of play like follow the error message game. It's like oh, now what do I need? Oh, I need to make a student's controller. And then like you'll try to hit that route again and it'll tell you the action isn't found. Oh, I need to make an action. You can just sort of do the things that the error messages are telling you to do. Okay, so the routing file can be closed now because I'm not going to need it anymore. I can also close these things and I can just open up the terminal so that I can create my student's controller. So I'm here at the terminal and I want to ask Rails to generate a controller for students with a show action. So Rails G, what am I generating? It's a controller, and the controller is going to be named the student's controller. Again, by convention, it's the plural of the model that we are sort of vetting for the view. And then I want just a show action. And so it'll just put that one method stub and it'll create the show view for me as well. And so we can see that here. It created the student's controller. Oh, yeah, it put a route into my routing file that I'm not going to want in there. So I'm going to go rip that out because I've already done the routing myself. But then it did the show view as well. So that's good. So I'll use my fuzzy finder. I'll hit Control P and I'll type constu, and that'll get me to my student controller. And then I will hit Control P and I'll just type routes, and that'll get me to my routing file. Oh, but that's the one thing. I haven't figured out how, when I'm using the fuzzy finder, to open up multiple tabs. Whenever VS Code opens up a tab and it's italicized, it's like a temporary tab ready to be replaced. So I don't know. If you figure that out, let me know. But there must be some way. That's at least a fix. But there must be some way to do it all in one go. And that's why it gets replaced if I try to fuzzy find something else. Okay. Control K, enter all at once. Oh, interesting. What does that do?
It unitalicize the text on the top.
Oh.
Control K is VS Code's like master keyboard. It's basically it's a chord key.
Oh, okay. So that's like from the Emacs world, right? So like there's like in old school editors days, there was always like big competitions between like the Vim people and the Emacs people, and like the Vim people are hotkey paste with like a leader key to sort of have custom hotkeys, and then the Emacs people are like chording basically. You're playing like a piano almost. That's cool. Okay, let's implement the show action in the student's controller. It just needs to load up a single student. The route is going to make an ID available to us. And remember, I said I was going to remove this route, so I might as well do that while I'm in here. That was the route that I just removed had been placed there by my student controller generator. That's the one part I find that why didn't the generator create me a RESTful route? I would have thought that would have been the default. Anytime I complain about Rails, like there's something at the back of my head saying, it's open source, go fix it yourself, right? So if that really bothered me so much, I'd probably go and fix that problem. Student, find the IDs in the params hash, and there you go. And now we need a view there is a student subfolder of the views folder now, and it has a show in it. So we just need to use that show. So I'll remove what's in there and I'll just put an H2 and I will output that student's name. And then here I can say maybe a paragraph tag, and I can say this student belongs to house student, at student dot house dot name. Get rid of this on the side. Period. Fairly simple. Just displaying, there's not much more to a student at this point in our application. We have a name and we can sort of go through the association to the house of that student. And so if I go to here and I try to load up student/some ID, I see a student, I see which house they belong to. I already have a routing system where I can route to houses, so I might as well use that right now, right? I might as well go here and change this to a link to, using the name of the house as the link text and student.house as the target. And so that'll just make this a little bit nicer. I'll be able to navigate directly to the house from the student. So I will go and check that out now. Did that not save? Student belongs to. Why is it not generating? Mysterious. Hello? What have I done, class? Why is this not working? I've got an app view students show, but it's not responding to my changes. I don't need a comma here because it's a method call, and so it's effectively doing this. Let me just see if things go south if I do that. That's good. That's not good. I've just deleted my view, and yet it still is showing. Rails, are you heavily caching something for me?
I had an issue the other day where what was happening was the web server was still running in the background, despite the fact that I didn't have Visual Studio open anymore.
Okay.
I actually had to restart my computer to get through that.
Oh.
Whatever it was, the task was still open. The process was still online somewhere on my machine.
Well, this one, I've got the server still running, right in VS Code. If I reload here, so it's here's the steps of how the server works. It starts by showing you what GET request came in, and then which controller action it was about to do, and then it's rendering it as HTML, what parameters came along for the ride. We see the different bits of SQL run. And this is the first part that's sort of problematic. Even though nowhere in the controller am I talking to the houses table and the show is empty, it's actually displaying that. This one here? Yeah, it opens this one up. So maybe this is just a weird caching issue. It's rare that you have to restart the Rails server. There it is. That was odd. In development mode, it's not supposed to cache that kind of stuff. Did that happen to anyone else in theirs? No? Okay. And then, as I said earlier, I also want all of these students in the houses index or in the houses show action to link to the individual students. And then we can sort of fully navigate our website between students and houses. And so for that, I need to go open up the show for the houses controller. And so I will control P and I will say like how show, and that'll get me to the houses show action, or sorry, the houses view. And then for each student name on line 6 here, I will link to, student name will be the first parameter and the student the second. Link to student name. There's all of our students. I can click on one of them. I can see that student's individual page. I can click back on the house, or I can click home. I can go into the various houses and navigate around my website. Does anyone need to see any of my code on any of the pages, or have any final questions about the sort of the second MVC packet or bundle that we've just implemented? So our routing system, if we look at it, oh, and also like I always just put in like a garbage route here, but you can also go to rails/info and it gives you a bit of a nicer view. And that only works, I'm pretty sure Rails info only works in development mode. And then ignoring all the routes at the bottom that have to do with like active storage, which is how Rails handles file uploads and inbound emails. These are our custom routes up at the top here. So we can see that we have that route path defined that goes to the houses index action. We have our student path that we just implemented, and then a show and an index, a houses and a house path for our houses controller.
One comment I'll make is that it's sometimes hard to know what's like Rails magic and what's just straight up Ruby sometimes.
Yeah, that's a huge thing with dealing with Rails. Rails is often taught in like bootcamp scenarios, like taking non-programmers and turning them into like web programmers in like, you know, a bootcamp might be 2 months, 4 months, 8 months. But one of the things I've heard from like bootcamp grads is because they're not spending a whole lot of time on Ruby up front, they see Ruby and Rails as like this thing that is like sort of integrated. And you also, and I do this as well, you start to fool yourself into thinking that some of the things that are in Rails are actually in Ruby proper. So Rails has this thing called active support that monkey patches a bunch onto the language that makes the language have sort of interesting features. But like when I leave Rails, I find myself trying to use active support commands that just aren't available to me. So yeah, it is hard to sort of disentangle what is Ruby and what is Rails, and that is a normal feeling. Although some people view that as a negative, right? Because it's like, well, I'm confused now. I don't know which is which.
Well, it tripped me up because I think when you were doing the first Lake 2 demonstration, you had said something about because of Rails naming conventions. So I was trying to use students or houses or something like that, but I had actually named my variable something else. So what I was actually going for was my variable that I had created earlier, but that's what Rails convention.
Yes, exactly. So it's also the Rails naming conventions are they apply in most places, but not all. And yeah, they're always based on like singularization, pluralization. So getting all of those conventions in your head can also be difficult. For me, it was quite easy because I came to Rails in like the really early days, like the Rails 2.0 days, and it was way simpler as a framework. So like as Rails is growing in complexity, I've been able to absorb those pieces of complexity over time. And so they've added in all sorts of stuff beyond what was there in 2.0. But I've heard someone describe it as like sort of coming into like a soap opera or a long running season and just like dropping in like season 8 and then being like, who are all these people, and then what are all these relationships? And so, yeah, that's sort of Rails. Any final comments or questions before we are done for the day? Yeah, so the question is like right now in our seed script, we are blowing away students by destroying all. There is a way of just straight up recreating the table, and that will start the IDs back at 1. I just don't know how to do that off the top of my head, so I always just destroy all. But yeah, that's a good question. There is a way of doing it. I think that's what it is, yeah. And so, yeah, if you just looked at the Rails API for Active Record, you'd be able to see there's like a delete all, but that doesn't do it. There is a way of doing it, but I'm not sure what it is. All right, thank you very much for coming to class today on an early morning. I will, after the video, I will save the rest of these changes into Git. I will make a repository on GitHub, and I'll push this whole repo up there. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week.